Yo, what's going on, everybody? I don't know what was going on there. It took a second for this thing to go live, but we are live, so that's the good news. Let me adjust the little camera position there. Woo! So I wanted to go live today because I wanted to talk about let's get this mic here a little bit better. I wanted to talk about the end of this year, especially just like this moment in time, right? We're a couple days from Christmas. There is this full moon that's been going on, and there's something different about the end of this year than we've felt before. And I think that on one hand, you have this extreme excitement for a lot of things in which we all feel we can finally achieve and reach for in our life. And on the other, we have a sense of void, a sense of confusion, and true surrender. And surrender can come in so many forms of surrendering to allowing the universe to present a lot of opportunity to us in the timing in which it feels is right. And then there's this other opportunity of like, do you jump, and when do you jump towards that? And so it kind of, I think, brings people into a lot of, I don't want to even call it like deep confusion or anything, but I think what it does is it brings people to a form of, you know, a lot to ponder that can sometimes become overwhelming. And then that pondering is the big question of, you know, what's the right road to choose ahead? There's a lot of this kind of good or bad that comes up. Like, if I pick this path, is that bad for me? And am I going to do something wrong? Am I doing something like not right by going that road? And if I choose this road, is this the good road? And does that feel right? Does the good road feel bad and the bad road feel good? I think those are a lot of questions that are coming up for people. And I just did a really cool interview with Victor Cara, and he asked me, what's the definition of good or bad, in my opinion, or even we can look at it as like good and evil. And I think that's a big question in our lives, because I think that at this point, with so much energy that is dealing with not only all this Jupiter and Sagittarius with our belief structures, and the first time we've ever felt the square to Neptune and Pisces with it beginning, and with Mercury as well, that is coming out of shadow, squaring this Neptune element. This is the first time in all of our lives that we've ever had such a very big debate internally of what is good or bad, what is right or wrong. It brings up deep subconscious belief structures. It brings up a lot of conditioning, whether that's the world conditioning or whether that's the conditioning of you know, your religion growing up, or your background of your religion when you were a child, or if you didn't have that, the issues or the traumas that have happened in your life, and the belief structures, the ideologies that you've created based off that. I could bring up a couple examples. So, and I don't know why my guides are wanting to bring up this one. When I just finished watching on Netflix, it was about the 90s. One of the episodes was about, you know, how rap became a big deal in the 90s. And they had asked Notorious B.I.G. before he was assassinated, they asked him, like, well, why do you rap about this stuff? And he was just like, this is the stuff that's in my life, that's around me. You know, I'm not singing about or rapping about things that, you know, I think would be great. I'm rapping about what's around me. And in my case, there's the hustle, and there's people with guns that are shooting each other. There's drugs. There's a lot of these things going on. So, you know, your own kind of conditioning and environment kind of can create your own kind of belief and ideology as well. If we look back in time to the last time that Jupiter squared Neptune, while Jupiter was in its home sign and Neptune was in Pisces, it was 1852 into 1853. And what actually came out of that, not only, of course, was the Civil War, but there was a deeper ideology back then that even transcended the Civil War, that actually then came into the beginning of the 1900s, which was prohibition. Because you have to remember that at that time, alcohol consumption during the Neptune and Pisces transit, and actually the finding of Neptune and Pisces, which was from 1846 through 1848, and ironically enough, Neptune went into Pisces 1848, and also was discovered by an astronomer who funded his astronomy career by being a brewer of beer. So I don't think it's even any more ironic that Neptune, which rules, whether it's addiction or alcohol and stuff like that, is ruled by Neptune. So you have to see that the ideology became after the Civil War that even though the great thing of slavery was definitely beat and finally free, that there became this philosophy that drinking was kind of the norm. And you can watch an old PBS special on prohibition on Netflix. I think it's still up. Just look it up. Prohibition. I think it's an older one. It was done, I think, 20 years ago, maybe even 25 years ago. But with prohibition in America, it had been a long, cycle to get to prohibition. And it was based upon, back then, so they make cider, beer and stuff like that. But cider was in barrels, usually at people's homes. And it was normal at breakfast to have alcohol. It was normal on your lunch break to go have a drink. And then if you look at, I'm really into old Westerns. I'm really into all the old cowboy energy and hanging out at the saloon. And the first past life regression that I ever did in my life brought me to those times, which was interesting. I don't have to go into that whole past life, but in that past life, I ended up as a very wealthy man by being inherited money from my grandfather because my parents died when I was young. And I didn't really have much to do. So I sat at the saloon and I would drink and I would smoke and I'd play poker and I would go up and see the prostitute up, at the saloon. And so you have to remember that saloons at the time was prostitution, gambling, and drinking, right? And then, of course, you always associate the duels that always happened in the street. Usually it was from a situation at the saloon. It wasn't like you were at church and got in a fight with somebody and then went out and said, I'm going to go out there. We're going to go, gunsling it. You know what I mean? Right? So I think the most interesting aspect of that time period was the saloon kind of got created as this very kind of ideology or philosophy of kind of a bad place. And outside the saloon, you had a society in which alcohol was normal and it was daily and it was breakfast, lunch, dinner. And it was okay. But then there became a lot of health aspects. There became people in society after the World War, because you have to remember there was actually, before the Civil War, there was a movement to try and, I guess you could say reform alcohol. Okay. There were a bunch of men who created kind of the first, it's not even Alcoholics Anonymous, but it was a group that was all about not drinking, because it was almost like you were not normal if you weren't a drinker. And so a bunch of men finally looked at their lives. It also got associated with the treatment of women and how, back then, especially without divorce and stuff, men would get drunk. They'd take out their hate or their frustrations from work or their hardship, and they would beat women. And so there was a very deep connection with alcohol back then. And so a lot of these men cleaned up. They started signing these petitions that they would not drink again. And then there was going to be a movement for prohibition. And then the Civil War came, and then that got taken out because that became such a gnarly and an intense war. And so many people died. And alcohol actually was a major influence in the war, because soldiers, to get through the war, were using alcohol to get through the war, right? So then the war finishes, and then the whole prohibition thing becomes about becoming kind of you know, being sober, being clean is clean, and that society needs to be clean, because if society is not clean, then we have all these problems, right? So there was this belief that if you just eradicate alcohol, then we will fix society. There will not be people on the streets begging for money. There will not be people beating other people. There will not be all these other things. And it takes a long time to get there. We're talking all through the end of the 1800s. Then you finally get to the 1900s, and finally prohibition starts to really find its legs. There was a woman, actually, I forgot her name, but she started it by going to saloons, because you got to remember that saloons, there was the traditional saloon that was always, you know, when you think about the Old West and all that stuff, that was there. But what happened was, after the war, there was a huge influx of immigrants that came into the country, a lot of them from Europe, and a lot of them were German. And so Anheuser-Busch, you know, Anheuser and all the big beer companies really came from Germany as German American immigrants came. And then what they did was they created huge breweries that created lots of beer. And then what they did with all that money was that they would go like a franchise, like how we see McDonald's franchised out. If you ever watched The Founder, right? They franchised out basically these bars, saloons, but they had to carry their brand of beer. And so saloons continued to go on, but they got a little bit more, I guess you could say, corporate. And then, you know, the saloon became the place where in society, it was, again, even in more modern, I guess you could say, you know, post-Civil War, you know, 19th century going into the 20th century, there was this element of this, like the saloon still had a bad vibe. Like, so women were afraid to walk by saloons, because usually you'd be at the saloon and there'd be a bunch of dudes outside. That's where shady crime would go on. There'd be a lot of, you know, there'd be funky stuff. And so this was a huge ideology from the Jupiter Neptune stuff. Believe it or not, it wasn't just slavery. It was about what is pure and what is not, which slavery goes underneath that. So it's, or goes on top of that. I would say that the underneath element was what's right and what's wrong of purity. And slavery, of course, was, I think, and I think all of us would say, is a much higher version of needing to be fixed before alcoholism, right? Like, that was just something that we know that Jupiter Neptune said that needs to be eradicated. But underneath slavery was before that, which actually lasted. And even with slavery, even though slavery ended, then there became the civil rights movement that came later on. But the Jupiter-Neptune cycle we're about to enter, the square, is intense because it's going to bring up what's right, what's wrong, what's not. And I want to go back to that woman real quick. I forgot her name because I watched a documentary a couple weeks ago. But what was so interesting about her was she would go to, it was in Kansas, because in Kansas, they had a law against drinking in saloons and stuff. It was the first state to say no alcohol, but the police, the governor, everybody of the state kind of said, the law's there, but we're not going to follow it, right? We're going to still do it. So she went in and she used to literally break the bottles. And then she started this whole entire like thing of all these women, and then some men too, who would go into somebody's saloon and break the bottles. And she goes, what are you going to do? And she got arrested a couple of times. She goes, what are you going to do? You going to arrest me? Like, it's illegal to have alcohol. So like, I'm just doing what's, you know, like a civil servant. And it moved on to Chicago, and then it moved on everywhere. And then this movement kind of really built up for prohibition. So it's like, okay, prohibition goes down. And what happens when prohibition goes down? Crime goes way up. You get speakeasies. You get corruption on the highest levels of the police. Everybody selling alcohol. That's what started the whole mob, was prohibition, right? So when you start taking away things from people, they're going to find a way to do it. You know what I mean? Like they're going to find their way to get it, whether they like it or not. That's how society's been. I mean, we've seen it with the drug war for the last, the 20th century coming into the 21st century when, all these drugs were legal. I mean, cocaine was in Coca-Cola. I mean, cocaine used to be an actual medical element, Neptune and Virgo, ironically enough, right? So you got to remember that the last time that Neptune was in Virgo was also at the same time that this whole prohibition thing came. And then we started to see all sorts of weird medicines, like really weird medicine stuff. Like it was like really weird, right? Like Hitler used to use, what was it? He used to use semen from bulls. Like I used to like ingest that or inject that, right? So Neptune Virgo brought up a lot of weird stuff, but when you take away this stuff from people, it created more of an issue than it solved, right? And so the question comes in your life now, okay, there's a part of all of ourselves that the Scorpio transit of the last 6 years has brought up that has definitely been, your true, authentic, real self, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it, right? Okay. It's ending at the beginning of January. When Venus leaves Scorpio, we will not see a major retrograde Scorpio transit besides Mercury and Venus for a long time. And that's 8 years, which will be the Venus one, which is more bigger than Mercury retrograde. Like Mercury retrogrades are, I'm going to be very honest with you all. They're not very, like they add karmic elements to events already happening in the sign, but by itself, a Mercury retrograde through a sign is because Mercury is a neutral planet. So it does deal with the higher energy of connecting to whether you call that God or source. And it also connects with, I guess you could say, I don't even want to, people associate bad with lower energy, but it will go to either side. It's neutral. So with Mercury is the only neutral planet. Remember that. So Mercury retrograde in Scorpio doesn't mean bullshit, really, because it's neutral. So the next transit of any major Scorpio retrograde, and there's no outer planets because the big outer planet transits of Scorpio happened all in the last 30 years, right? Like we had Pluto from 83, 84, it kind of went back and forth all the way into the 90s. Then we had Uranus, right? That was in the 70s, okay? All the way into the right at the beginning of the 80s. And then Neptune was there as well in the 60s, 70s energy, right? So there are no more outer planets coming to Scorpio for a long time. Uranus will be the next one, and look at where Uranus is coming, Taurus. So it's 40 some odd years away from coming into Scorpio. So Scorpio's done. The last 6 years was the deepest Scorpio. And actually, if you go back to 35 years with the Pluto-Saturn elements that were in there, and then you look at this 6 years, that was the most Scorpio we'll ever see in our lives. So now that that's done, and now we move into this Sag, Capricorn, Aquarius stuff, because now that's where everything is. Capricorn's where everything is mainly. It's all moving to Aquarius in 2020 with Saturn, Jupiter, and then Pluto following, right? And then Sag is going through Jupiter in its own sign, and it has to go through a retrograde there. Okay, so then the nodes are going to move into Sagittarius in about 17 months and Gemini. So we're not even done with the Sag vibe as far as beliefs, and we've got Neptune squaring it. And you've got also Pisces, which isn't done because Pluto will even come into Pisces, pretty much in about 20 years. So at the end of the day, like we're really at the end of the zodiac with all of the major outer planet stuff. Okay. And so when you get all this like major kind of end at the very end of the chart over the next couple of decades, it really is kind of coming to the end of like the old era and the end of yourself, of how you've been. But with the Scorpio stuff done, your ideologies and your belief systems of what is good for you and what is bad and what is authentic to yourself and these choices we're making in life, that's really the big question that honestly, you have to actually not try and get convoluted into the ideologies that have been subconsciously embedded from you. So back then, the ideology that, you know, alcohol was bad kind of got started by somebody and then got kind of spread out, and then they went for it, and then it didn't really turn out the way they thought it would. So you can see how a misguided interpretation of a belief system or a dogmatic element of this is what is right, this is what was wrong, that's where ethics is involved instead of beliefs. Ethics definitely come to a place of like, is murder bad, or is, you know, cheating and lying and these kind of things. And at the end of the day, I think a lot of this comes towards, you know, the question in yourself, instead of like looking outside for these religious elements or these elements of, oh yeah, this is the way that it is. Because if you look at every religion, they think they know the way, and that's the only way. But there's a common denominator with them all, which really is that good is fulfilling. And in my opinion, and I just said in an interview tonight, I said, if it's good, it will constantly fulfill you and bring you harmony and love and surround you with greatness. If it's bad, it will be empty. It will be challenging constantly. And so you have to look at your life and determine a very hard choice with all this Capricorn at the end of this year and coming into the beginning of the year, and the eclipses that are about to start in January. And more importantly, the end of this Scorpio transit, as your true self has been revealed in your own private and very deep inner way. Who really are you? And are now it is your beliefs. It is your core subconscious beliefs that are being stirred up. Is this right for me to do this? Should I do this? Is this going me against God? Is God going to still be happy with me if I do this in my life the way I feel? And I think the deep question of the philosophy of God, the philosophy of beliefs, the philosophy of certain religions, is coming up to its peak element here, because it is the true weird space in which things are at about the choices we're making at the moment. And as you make these choices, the number one thing that could affect you is by reacting to the decision of your life that's coming here based off an ideology, a belief system that could be subconsciously embedded in you throughout thousands of years. We are finishing the age of Pisces, by the way, and Neptune's in Pisces, and Neptune is coming to its halfway spot in the zodiac and moving past 15 degrees, coming to 18 degrees in 2019. And we are stepping ourselves into a deep subconscious fog of illusionary belief systems that have run their course in a new world that is being started. And then you have the fear factor of, you know, whether in Judeo-Christian, especially more Christian, of the Antichrist being this, you know, form that thinks that it's going to rally everybody in the right way and take people away from Christ-like energy, which, in my opinion, is quite interesting, because, you know, what a great way to scare people to follow anything outside of Christianity at all, right? Like that it is only the only way. Like that is the most dogmatic thing in the world. You know, when people see that I wear crosses, like, it's unintentional. Like, I didn't even realize till now, but the way that this thing sits is supposed to be like this or whatever, right? Like, but when people see, and I have my cross like this, okay, they think I'm like the Antichrist or something. Like, I've gotten like a lot of stuff about that, especially, you know, 2 years ago, I did Age of Deception, which it's free on YouTube. You can watch it, or it's on Vimeo. And And it's a 5-hour documentary video live talk I did about this age of deception of the religious orders, the fear mongering, why was astrology castrated from the world a couple thousand years ago, especially within the last 1,200 years of the formation of the Catholic Church with Pope Pectin, who was the first pope to take over as the Emperor of Rome and connect Rome and the church together for the first time fully, as having a pope be the ruler of Rome in 800 AD. So there's a lot there in that video that'll blow your mind. But these choices that we're making coming into this year, you know, when you ask yourself, am I making the right choices? Am I going to miss the boat? Am I on the right path? Those things are actually deeply convoluted by some very messy belief systems that you have to go through in yourself of the challenge of making a choice based off what your ideology, your belief systems, or your subconscious stuff that has been brewing inside of you, that's in your bloodline, that's deeply in your, especially with Neptune and that rules the media's version of it all. Or media can go from television to books to Netflix documentaries. How funny I was talking about it, right? So when I was watching the 90s, like, okay, so the 90s are written by how Tom Hanks, who's the producer of that show, the lead producer, shows how the 90s were, right? So, you know, when they showed George Bush's story, senior, and then they showed Clinton's story, or they show the stories of Tupac's death or Notorious B.I.G.'s death, or boy bands, or there's so much in that series, right? Like, it's all kind of written by how it's produced and how the media had shown things. But there were so many things in the 90s that weren't ever shown, that we all lived, you know, and how we all felt, that's different than what's projected. So when you come into this huge projection piece now of what you're choosing, it becomes very difficult, because in many ways, as Jupiter squares Neptune, which is bigger, Jupiter is bigger than Neptune, but Neptune's in its home sign, and there's Chiron at the end of Pisces, finishing in February and coming into Aries, where by February, you will drop into either A, feeling like you made the worst choice of your life because you didn't get the identity that you want, or B, you are about to start the healing process of finally becoming the person you want to be. Now, that happens in both ways. So let's say you choose something because your belief says you shouldn't do this or not. So a good example would be, I don't know, let's use spirituality for an example. So let's say you've been hanging on not wanting to become an astrologer or a tarot reader because your family is very Christian, or you know, your fiance or your lover doesn't believe in it with you, or whatever, right? So you have a choice of like choosing this position. And let's say you choose not to. You choose not to do it because your beliefs and the fears and the subconscious beliefs say if you do that, then you'll be castrated or your family won't like you. Then Chiron and Aries will begin the cycle of you healing that through the long cycle that it will be there, as long as this Uranus transit in Taurus will be in 2019 all the way to 2026. I mean, Chiron's in Aries for a long time. You got to remember that Chiron is at its longest through Pisces and Aries than it is in any other sign. So how ironic, because Chiron does deal with empowerment and being, you know, truly humble through not only healing, but it also is a warrior, and it is the key, and it is the unlocking of the true self in many ways. So you have this big quest that's here, Saturn and Neptune sextile. You have this huge transformational, you know, year in front of us with all the planets in dignity as we start the year. I mean, most of them, Mars and Aries, its home sign, Saturn and Capricorn, Neptune and Pisces, and Jupiter and Sag, all in their home signs And you have the North and the South node in Capricorn and Cancer amplifying this Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which is beginning in Capricorn since the last time was 16, 17 right there. I mean, like you have to really start to see like this big call that you make in your life is all on you, on your own beliefs and your fears or your subconscious beliefs on what other people, what the collective projection is of a belief of how you should do things, what is good or what is bad, you know, right? And especially at the end of Pisces, which Chiron is, this having to fully let go and surrender. You know, I think Michael Luton says it best. He did a talk on Pisces on Turning the Wheel with Chris Fletcher. You should really listen to it. It's very, very good. You can just go to Turning of the Wheel on Google and then look up episodes, look up Michael Luton Chiron like 4 weeks ago. But he used a great analogy about Christ. So here we are talking about Christmas, right? Which they say is the birth of Christ, right? And so they always give us this birth element of kind of the actual like physical birth. But really, is it more of the real death of Christ that created, or the death of Jesus, and then the 3 days of resurrection till Christ is formed, right? That's what we know if we watch Zeitgeist or if we follow even the scientific element of on December 21st, the equinox happens. And it does take 3 days for the sun on December 25th, most on average, right, for it to start to rise again, especially in the northern hemisphere, okay? But the analogy that he used that I really like was, do you think when Christ was on the cross getting beaten to death literally and literally nailed to a cross and killed, do you think that at that moment he said, oh my God, am I a fucking idiot? Like I believe in this thing I'm preaching and it's ended me up here? Is this thing gonna, am I gonna get paid off? Like, is God gonna do anything good to me, or what's the deal? You know, whether that story's true or not, right? We all kind of have that in ourselves that's coming up here. Am I an idiot because I feel that I have to do this, even though it goes against what a lot of people might not like? Number one, you're honest at the end of Aries. A lot of people and what you want might not like it, and then others will. So there were great followers of Jesus, and then there were not great followers. I mean, Romans did not like Jesus. They killed him. Okay? So in your life, you need to remember that, like, you have your own choice now of your beliefs, your deep subconscious stuff that's brewing, the questions of pondering on whether or not you're doing something good, bad, or evil, or righteous or not, in what feels right to the true self of who you are and what you feel called towards, and whether or not people are going to go with you, or they're not going to understand, or are they going to be compassionate? And are you an idiot if you go in that direction because that's what feels right? That's what feels like you. And are you going to use that with this huge Saturn-Neptune element, with this Saturn-Pluto element that's coming in, with this Capricorn Pisces stuff of like deep feeling like a calling? Like, is this calling schizophrenic? Is this calling retarded? And are you delusional? Or is it actually like the truest path for which you know in your own soul you have to do, even though it is not going to, it's going to come with the cost of making a choice that people probably will not understand, of the cost of, you know, going through the extreme surrender and letting go of something that seems like you'd be an idiot if you stopped or you let it go, but you are moving into the you that you want to be. So with Venus finishing in Scorpio, it is about certain jobs, projects, relationships are a huge one, especially as Uranus is finishing here in Aries. And we also are going to have Venus and Mars trining at the beginning of this year coming up in fire signs and Sag, and Aries, and with Jupiter in its home sign, and Jupiter and Mars are coming. So there is this element, and with the square to Venus too. Like, you know, I talked about this in my tour videos. I talked about this in a lot of stuff this year. That, you know, or in the magazine, I go really deep into love and relationships. And this has to do more than just romantic. I mean, business partnerships, friendships, you know, alliances, tribes. There's a lot of this stuff coming up. But a lot of this is like, are you an idiot for letting go of this job? That's so great. You know, it's like the guy who makes $1 million is the CEO of some big corporation that just got bought out by somebody, and he's taking orders and he doesn't like it. And he has to do things that he feels is wrong to the world. But, you know, his wife's telling him to keep the job, to keep the house in the Hamptons. And, you know, he's got his children going through school, but it feels just deathly wrong. And then on the other half, he has this choice of something that feels so right, but it just feels like you'd be an idiot if you left it go. But he's not connected with this job as the CEO. Maybe he's more connected with being like a fisherman or something, whatever, you know, or whatever it is, right? So it's so totally usually something so kind of, you know, different, like maybe or a captain of a boat. Okay, since he's a CEO, that makes more sense. Like it's usually going to be something that's very similar, but in a whole different field of emotional need and want and desire. And so that's the questions that are coming very powerfully and coming up. And as you go through this holiday, and this full moon has come up, and Venus Neptune had just trined, and with a lot of the elements that are happening. That's the big question that you have to ponder now in yourself, is the choice that you're making that's coming at the beginning of this year that builds upon Chiron ending in Pisces, that builds upon Uranus coming direct and coming into Taurus, of are you going to deny your true authentic self of what it needs to suit a dogmatic belief system that's been embedded and subconsciously been embedded within you, to actually set you back? Or are you going to then follow what seems crazy, illogical, and deeply embedded in your soul of a quest that you know you must go, but there will be a loss, there will be a let go, there will be a removal of something that definitely will question your mental health, question your sanity in this reality. But at the end of the day, my biggest question to you is, living the life in which we've been told to live, is that insanity? Or is sanity actually living the life in which you feel is the right way? And that's why I brought up ethics at the beginning of all this, because there's ethics, of course, of good and right and wrong, of love and not love. But where does that line draw? And there always is a greater than, right? In yourself, that at least you feel. That you feel that there's more love in this direction than another. Like, if we look at how God created the planets, God obviously wanted more heat on Venus by its placement than it did with Pluto. So it gave the love of heat, but it gave the love of cold, which doesn't mean that it's bad, to Pluto, right? So where is that greater than in your choice of your life, in your whole life, of your whole purpose now, that's all coming to this line? And with a blank sheet of paper when it comes to what we see financially coming in the world, what we see in the government right now, and what we see in how the world governments are, that there is this whole table resetting. So really, we all are coming into a very unknown world where the only thing that is known is what feels the most right and deep in yourself, of a path, the connections and the feelings and the fulfillment of good that you want to feel in your heart. But it will require you to make a very tough choice. And that tough choice is going to be what shows up to the table during a time in which the whole world is renegotiating what that new table looks like, including in your life. There is also a system of all this Capricorn stuff in where playing based upon a, what I would like to call subconscious diversion towards messing with your choice based off a fear, off a feeling like you're doing something wrong for doing what you feel is truly right and good in your heart, is ready to suck people up into that system by not following their heart, by not following it, and step into true slavery. Because at the end of the day, with the alignments of Saturn, Pluto, South Node in Capricorn, and with Jupiter entering in December 2nd of 2019, we will have the largest amount of Capricorn we've ever seen in our life since 1282 through 1284. I've talked about that one a lot. 2, we also are having Jupiter square Neptune, which the last time was about the conscious awareness of slavery that was happening finally. Like, there were people who, you have to remember, during slavery, it was embedded within them from their father, from their grandfather, from their, passing on, especially on the masculine kind of patriarchy of like slavery was normal. Like, it was okay, like it was like normal. It was like, yeah, like get the slaves to do that, get the slaves to do that. Okay. It was like normal. So when Jupiter squared Neptune, like we're about to happen, it started to bring up, Uncle Tom's Cabin. The book came out to kind of start to show what the heck's going on here. And then there was another book, I think it was called Reformation, about the other side trying to say, no, slavery is good. And, there was a battle between all this stuff. And we all know at the end of the day that slavery is not good. So the end of the day is the choice that you make actually is a choice on whether or not you want to be a slave to a system based off an ideology and a belief system that is subconscious, that you have been embedded with to make you feel guilty for being who you really want to be and what you really feel, that has a lot of dying institutions of religion attached to it, that has a lot of dying institutions of old, traditions, especially with Pluto and Capricorn, that go back hundreds of years. And we can go back all the way to the 1500s, and then we can go all the way back to the 1200s because of the fact that Pluto, Saturn in Capricorn with Jupiter go back all the way to that 1282 spot to 1284. And then the 1517 Renaissance period, you have to remember, nobody remembers, even though it was a great time of art, how many people really got remembered for the Renaissance? There were hundreds and thousands of people with guitars and singing and, shows. We remember things like Shakespeare in our life, right? We remember things like during that time, Leonardo da Vinci was finishing a lot of his work, and then he died shortly after the Pluto-Saturn conjunction. We had a influx of art at such a massive element at that time, because you have to remember that preceding the conjunction of Saturn and Pluto in 1282 through 1284 was the Dark Ages, which the Dark Ages was just a time where there was not a lot that was created, or there's not a lot of information from that time. There was a Black Plague at that time as well, that was very traumatic and caused people to, and the plague actually also came back in the 1500s. Even Nostradamus, who was around during the time of the 1500s, his first wife and child died of the plague. And he had to go through that and continue on. And so I think that there's another element too. And I think that this brings up where some people might think I'm really crazy, but I do believe, and now this is kind of a very gnarly subject, but during the plagues, that I believe that those that were not following their true calling and heart, that the plague in many ways, I don't know, it might sound crazy, but there's a lot to think about how the plague pulled people out of this reality in a very dark, weird way, who maybe were part of a system of a fundamental ideology of a way to live, and were holding themselves back, or were stuck in a actual societal / belief system, slavery system, in which was holding them from their true heart and happiness, and afraid of stepping into their true authentic self. Because now that now that Scorpio has ended, it doesn't mean that it goes away. It just means that if you cannot live in your authentic self, you will start to feel as if you are dying, literally and spiritually, because you are now no longer fulfilling your needs. And that the fact that there's only one planet left in Scorpio means we are running to the bottom of any sort of IV left, while we sit in the hospital bed of our lives at the moment, that is feeding us necessity of desire and passion of authentic self, that will leave in January and force all of us to make a choice with the eclipses, with Saturn, Pluto now within less than 10 degrees, with South Node conjunct Pluto, that's in March into April. South Node conjunct Saturn as it's stationed and goes retrograde in April of 2019. This is no longer there is no more IV left. There is no more safety left. There is no more holding space for denial of what feels true of you. And that is the hardest part about this, is funny. And so that's where I leave you all with. I will be doing a video like I do every year since 2012 of I call it my Year of the End address. It's going to be similar to this, but it will have a lot more information, of course, about 2019 as a whole. But I really thought I would be real with where things are at right now and let people know that what seems difficult and scary is actually not, because all that is really terrifying about the next cycle that we are leaving, this last 6-year cycle, and this one goes longer than 6 years. This one goes pretty much, I would say, the next 20 years. I would say until like 2040, 2045, okay, is you will feel death by not being who you internally feel you really need to be and be connected with and doing. Because if you don't, based off what astrology has proven through every cycle we've come into with Saturn, Pluto, and Capricorn, has preceded a plague. And everybody that I have researched that has survived the plague was living in their authentic self. That I might sound like a fucking insane person right now. And I am not trying to scare anybody, because the truth is that I believe the survival of the next 20 years is only by surviving, by living within your authentic true self, no matter how crazy it seems. And of course, ethically on the path of righteous good and love. But if it's missing, if it doesn't feel aligned, if it doesn't feel you, if it doesn't feel like you can be and feel in all aspects of your life the way that you know is divinely to you, then you are essentially moving into the prison camp of slavery. And from what history has shown me through these transits, there has always been a plague that precedes that. And the people that are in that vibration seem to get taken out. That's some gnarly shit, I know. But that's some truth from astrology. Or fuck astrology. Let's just look at these times when the plagues do happen and what happens. Also, any of the gnarly things that happened during the last 6 years, we had Ebola scare. I think we had the Ebola scare twice. I think we had a little SARS scare. We've had a number of outbreaks of salmonella poisoning lately. We've had a number of things about romaine lettuce and stuff like this. We've also, there's a bunch of reports from medical Western doctors that have come out saying that antibiotic use has been so intense now that there are strains of bacteria now that they cannot kill because people are just getting things and then they're giving them antibiotics, and people can't do this. But there was something about the Scorpio energy that was able to contain us. And that's why I've been calling this the protective element from these spaces. But it's over after this at the beginning of January. And if you choose to not live in your core of whatever feels crazy and to define what you want and feel that has come up over the last 6 years and has approached during this year at the height peak of a major choice, you have to turn towards in your life to make your life the way that you want to, then I'm not saying that that will happen, but I am saying this is what's happened in the past, and maybe there's a connection. That's what I do as a horoscope astrologer. So is that something that, we all want to go towards? Is that something that maybe we can avoid by all of us actually not stepping into these old belief structures and subconscious, like media / embedded, like really deep subconscious belief ideologies that hold you from who you really are and feeling who you really are? That's all I got for today. I got to run. I got some stuff to do. I got filming to do, and it's Christmas coming up already tomorrow, Christmas Eve. I'm wishing you all a beautiful Christmas. I'm sending you all the best. I hope that this message that I felt very deeply called to came up to you, and that it didn't trigger or offend anybody. I hope not, or scare you, because I think that the only scary thing is to not do what is, at the end of the day, the most highest form of love, which is to follow what feels divinely called in this moment right now in your life that you're pondering on whether or not you should do. That feels complicated, but at the end of the day is who you really are, what you really, I don't even want to say should do, but will connect with at the deepest source, and will provide you the fuel and the protection through the next couple decades. Because at the end of the day, which I didn't say that a lot today, but that is what this is about. Because this planet finds ways to erode or get things off that don't make sense anymore and that are not connected. And there are not even a number I can use because there's so many souls waiting to come down here. I remember coming into this life, and I remember it was very fast because I already had left this life, and I've said this to some people, but I'm an apprentice to a bunch of architects of the universe. That's what I was doing before this. And I got called and said, hey, and a bunch of other apprentices did too. But there's a new universe being built, and the architects are moving to build this new universe, and they need apprentices to step up, because at the end of the day, that there's this feeling or this sense that in this new universe, there's no point really in, like, I don't want to say fixing this universe, but building a universe full of life. Whereas if you look at this universe we're in, it's actually full of a bunch of life that's kind of just there, except Earth for some sort of reason. I think we're about to find out a lot more of that truth in the next coming decade. But the deal is that I remember I had a choice that I had to make very fast. Like, you have to go back to Earth. You have to go back there. And you have to go for yourself, figure out how to master what being an architect is, which is not only learning the power of knowing how to, when at all odds are against you, stay within alignment of what you feel is right and create and inspire, but at the same time, listen deeply to, what the universe and the predetermination says, and follow that with your internalized understanding of what we think is free will, which is whether or not we are accepting of the reality that is predetermined in front of us. Because if you can accept the pre-written elements of the universe, then the new universe, when the creators come into that one, will follow the guidebook of a higher divine source that will create a whole new world and a whole new universe of love and light and positivity. But we are in a universe where people decided not to follow the predetermined way in which God created something like this beautiful Earth, and created stars and planets that don't look anything like Earth, don't work, don't have shit on it, and is like counterfeit. And we live in a beautiful Earth that was supposed to be the place in which the whole galaxy was supposed to be. But from what we've been able to see up until this point, it's just a bunch of counterfeit creator gods that just created a bunch of shit by not following or accepting the true divine path and the true divine science of the true hermetic alchemy, I guess you could say, of the universe. So I remember going into this life and having to make a quick decision on whether or not I was going to do this or not, and that it was not going to be fun, but it actually could be a lot of fun if you actually follow this. And I said, okay, I'm going to go. And I remember being escorted to the front of the lines and passing trillions beyond a number above trillion, which I don't even know what it is. Gajillion? I don't know. And all light beings, no actual form, but emotional and karmic feeling. And the observation of, what the fuck is this guy doing jumping the line? And when I saw those infinite 360-degree fields of souls, okay, and when I got to get jumped in here, that sits in my brain, in my soul, every day in my life, that's how many people want down here. And when catastrophes happen, or especially when I look at the plagues now, there has to be a point to where, for some reason in this world, if you're not playing ball with the universe and stepping into your greatest self and doing something of purpose for divinely following your calling and your true authentic self, and have become sucked in to the slavery of ingesting your energy and power away from you, which is what slavery is, and higher forms of slavery, which is coming, is literally ingesting your energy and using it from you, comes to a point to where once they've used all your energy, there is nothing left for you to be around for. And these plagues seem to take out people, in my opinion, from my viewpoint, that are not stepped fully into that vibration and are sucked into the system. So Have a wonderful Christmas. I know that's like the worst, the craziest thing to say, but I had to say it. There's a lot going, there's a lot on the table right here. So process that. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's just a good story and a great movie that I'm talking about. And let's hope that's what it is. I love you all. I'm sending you the best for this holiday. I got to roll. Peace out. Have a good holiday. And if you've already done your holiday and you had Hanukkah at the beginning of the year, enjoy this new year and just enjoy this time where you get off. And all of us are changing so much. And all of us have a lot of big choices to make. And all of us have to really get to the bottom of what that is. So don't pressure yourself too much, because at the end of the day, once you know what that really is, after pondering it and feeling it, don't be afraid to just step into that and surrender and let go of the fear and let go of whatever weirdness it might feel to step into that, because you will be on the greatest road of all time. Love you all. Talk to you later. I am out.